The climate change is irreversible, and that is the gut check benefit, and that is the gut check truth of the entire debate. The truth is going to value above any other argument on how we can solve climate change, because everyone knows that climate change is irreversible, and that is the truth that we will put on the top of our speech. First, three things in my speech. There'll be the setup, the two arguments we're going to provide, and also two preemptions later on in my speech. First, setups. Three questions to answer. A, how does the scientific community look like? We would argue on proposition that the scientific community is seen as a reliable source. People are keen to listen about what the scientific community will say with great to know how that the scientific community are able to solve changes in our world. Second question is as to what do the scientific community actually care about? They care about solving solvable problems with the current limited resources they have in our hand. I will further explain this in my first argument. And the third question that's under is how does the two worlds look like before I start my speech? First, on propositions, scientists will try to allocate all of the limited resources to the issues that can be solved. For example, as I mentioned on the top of my speech, because climate change is irreversible, there's no point in putting so much research, money, and time onto climate change, knowing that you can't solve it in the first place. But moreover, on our side of the house, scientists are going to put more time, money, and also resources in trying to solve things, for example, like plastic, or like trying to make better or recyclable projects for our world. Now, in this, what will the framing be in this debate? We would frame this as a status quo, because status quo is already under the harms of climate change. The amount of plastic you see, the CO2, the greenhouse gas, those are already the emissions of climate change. Therefore, it is proven that if it was solvable, then it would have been solved a long time ago. But exactly because it is irreversible and hard to solve, you can't, no house in the entire debate can tell us or have the fiat to say that on their side of the house they can solve climate change in any way. Therefore, this debate isn't about which side can solve climate change, but it's rather which house has the best allocation of resources. Now, leading on to our two arguments. The first argument is on how we can best allocate this limited resources, which will also be the path to victory later on in this debate. Two things. First, how can these scientists take money, resources, and time and put it into better use? Because we realize on the top of my speech, as I say again, climate change is irreversible. There's no point in using a climate optimism in the scientific community to make scientists actively look out for change, because there's already been a lot of sources online for the past decade, century, and there's no solution to climate change. Moreover, the best use of these resources, time, and money is to put them into things that we can fund. For example, making better plastic bottles, making more recyclable things, or like putting it into like how to solve daily options that can decrease the greenhouse gas emissions by not solving climate change, because climate change is irreversible. Moreover, what is the impact of this on both sides of the house? First, on proposition, there can be more innovation in a short amount of time, because a lot in the status quo, scientists already have very limited like funding coming from the government or even coming from the public. So their money, their resources, their time is very limited, and it's very valuable. Therefore, on proposition side of our house, we can make sure that these scientists can go over with can use climate change doomerism, so they can use this money and allocate it in better places of the world, because they know that it's irreversible and there's no point in openly trying to find a solution. Moreover, however, on the opposition side of the house, scientists are only going to dump in more of their time, money, and knowledge, but however, with at the same time knowing the truth that climate change is irreversible, we think that this is useless, because these are scientists, not normal people, which means scientists already know that you can't make a change, and they're still putting so much money, time, and limited resources onto things you can't solve. Rather, a proposition, we can prove to you how we can put these time, money, and allocations onto things that are actually solvable and will make our world a better place in the livelihood of humanity. So why this is so important, right? Because we think this is extremely important in the entire debate, because as I framed it, this debate is not about the solution of climate change, but whichever house has the best allocation of the limited resources we have. Therefore, putting limited resources and proving to you as to why we go by climate change doomerism to allow these scientists to put money onto places that can be actually solvable, this will be the highest part of our debate, because not only are they solving solutions and giving solutions to problems that exist, and also providing more innovations to a world to make it a better place. Yes, I'll take a POI.
You said it's about the allocation of resources and it's not about solutions. What are these resources you're allocating trying to do if not solving climate change?
Wait, no, as I mentioned again, you don't need to use climate optimism, which is basically putting like having scientists put so much money onto climate change itself. You can put like money onto like, let's say, plastic bottles that don't lead to climate change, and also innovations that would step by. Because on your comparative, scientists are openly trying to find the solution for climate change itself and not the other minor factors of it. Therefore, in our side of the house, they're putting more money into things like, plastic bottles or shampoo bottles or like water, and how to make it more like sufficient in our world. That is actually more important, more solvable in our side of the house. Therefore, leading on to a second argument as to why, even if we take them in the best case that climate change is solvable, why there's a bigger incentive for the community on the proposition side to make an actual difference. First, realize that there's two major differences between prop and op. Prop gives you fear and op gives you encouragement. We think that in the status quo, if encouragement is so helpful, then people would have already made a change. But we realize because encouragement is obviously not helpful or climate change would have already been solved, we're going to be using fear. Fear allows people to really make a difference or make a change, because optimism makes people feel as if other people are making a change for them. For example, in the status quo, Greta Thunberg went around with signs and placards saying that how she's going to solve climate change, but that is only under the premise of fear, because she's fearful for it, because she makes other people around her feel really fearful about the entire climate change and making people dying event, which is why a lot of people are also joining the climate movement. However, back in the days when all the politicians go up and say, hey, we should like make this like a better place with like green text and etc., not a lot of people actually join in the flow because they don't feel the fear. They don't think their lives are reckoned by any way. They don't think that they're harmed in any way, which is why fear is the only possible solution against optimism to really make people feel a change. Now, going to preemptions. First, if they tell us that it's gonna give people hope and try to save these issues. Two, what? Okay, there's two layers of like preempted rebuttals against this. Number one, I don't think people in the status quo think it's that bad. Do you realize that people around them is gonna think, because of the optimistic ideologies, they're gonna think that scientists don't really care about it. It's not that important. This is why you're not making like a really quick change to it, but rather encouraging people to make it. Moreover, if it's so easy to solve climate change, then they would have done it long ago. They wouldn't have saved it until now to use fear. Fear is the last resort, Judge. If you want to vote for a world that people are actually making actively a change, if you want to vote for a world where scientists are actually actively trying to make solvable solutions, fear is the key, because fear is the only thing that is the last resort for people to actually opt into. For those reasons, proud to propose.
In the beginning of my speech, I was probably first just pointing out a contradiction, which in the other side's case, and then next going on to just like further framing as to what this kind of actually, like, for example, putting these kind of narratives into the scientific discussions actually looks like, which the Prime Minister has not done, or at least hasn't done enough. Next going on to basically just like our three contestants, and our deputy will be basically doing the refutation. Next going on to the contradiction. They first say that climate change is irreversible and that people know it, but in reality, yeah, they know that people know that climate change is irreversible. What does this mean? This means that people are very afraid of the world actually falling apart because they know that people are irreversible. This is the fear and this is their narrative. And then they say people know encouragement doesn't work. Well, the reality is that they don't actually have a very clear characterization in the status quo. They don't characterize whether or not in the status quo people believe more inside of one specific narrative or whether or not they believe in the other narrative. Therefore, for that reason, some certain characterization that they provide don't actually work under the status quo, so they don't provide enough like explanations as to how that would actually work. Let's go on to our characterization and explaining it even further. In the current status quo, there's a 50-50 divide. There's an amount of people that actually do believe that climate change has a lot of problems. They believe that the world is kind of doomed. The other amount of people believe in optimism, and I believe that the world still has a message to actually become a better place. Climate change and environment is commonly discussed, and even the public knows about it. What does this mean for our framing, however? This means that we're also talking about the impact of this kind of like messaging in the scientific community on society, and not just on the scientific community. We're not just talking about the kind of allocation of resources as claimed by opening government, but also about what kind of messaging and what the impacts of this messaging would be on the minds of the moral people inside of society. Next, I'll be basically characterizing what this messaging is. Messaging looks like publishing papers, having discussions, etc., with a hopeful tone, and mentioning in news reports, etc., that the Earth still has hope. And that's vice versa for the other side. Climate optimism is a belief that Earth is not doomed and that it can actually still be saved. So it means that the efforts to actually change anything within that world will not be in vain. And it isn't just blind optimism, as in it isn't just narrowly just saying that perhaps, hey, I'll be able to succeed, yet saying that it also means that scientists are very well informed and will actually be publishing statistics, etc., so properly, as in they won't be changing statistics, but they'll be basically only using a good tone, as in they're very well informed, but they will still feel hope, and it does not mean not acknowledging the downsides. Therefore, our stance is that we'll be encouraging climate optimism and will be urging discussers to discuss topics related to it, rather than actively discussing the opposite. We have the burden to prove that this emphasis would benefit scientific community and society as a whole, which opening government has not done. Therefore, next let's go on to basically our contentions, which kind of directly clash with opening government. Our first contention is on the increased motivation towards change. Opening government already said how basically people already have hope. I don't think that the hope is really successful. At least that's what they say. They think that perhaps in current status quo, people already know that hope isn't really successful. They've lost hope, etc., etc. However, we tell you that that's untrue. In reality, the scientists actually tell people otherwise, because scientists are so valuably respected inside of society, as in since they're so respected and the people believe in their words so much, if they choose to actually spread this narrative of doomerism, or if they spread the opposite, as in if they spread optimism, then there's very likely that other people will similarly believe in this narrative, because they think that scientists are actually very trustworthy. This is because most people tend to believe inside of people that have higher place in society, for instance, like scientists. They tend to believe in what scientists say because they are already very powerful people, and two, they have the statistics to prove their own points. Overall, as these scientists can actually provide these kind of statistics and be very trustable people in society, them promoting this kind of narrative of optimism can in fact motivate the children, motivate people to actually change in reality. However, on the government side of the world, the comparative is that they don't have the same kind of motivation. Even though people may be very scared of dying in the future, it's still vitally important for humanity to have hope. If you don't have hope at this point, no, then you will never actually be able to feel that any kind of motivation to change, because on their side, as in what actually happens under doomerism, isn't that people feel pressure to change. It's that people feel scared, they feel stressed, they feel extremely horrible emotions, they feel like they can't do anything about it. On our side of the world, you feel that yes, there's so many problems with the current world, there's so many problems with the status quo, but no, you can still actually in fact change a lot of things about that, and that's what actually gives you the motivation to change. Not just blindly feeling fear, no, and actually just basically telling everyone else that there's going to be a lot of problems within society. Our next intention is on losing the profit. It's mainly about how basically the scientists publishing their own opinions about the doomsday topic will be able to actually influence the government and influence society to the point that there's no longer any proper resource allocation, which also directly clashes with the other sides. Basically, the idea of this is that since the government will be basically putting more emphasis on their world, on the idea that climate change is irreversible, this means that on government side of the world, the industry, for example, environmental industry, their plastic bottle, shampoo bottle industries, they'll receive a lot less attention and they'll start declining, because nobody sees any point in trying to make these plastic bottles any more sustainable, as in they think that there's nothing that's going to be succeeding in that case. They think that nothing is going to help them, that they're kind of hopeless, and so what's the point of actually trying so hard if nothing is going to succeed anyways? In that case, people no longer see the necessity of this kind of environmental industries anymore, because they lost hope. The kind of fear that is felt on the other side of the world is not stress, it's not anxiety, it's blind fear, and it's kind of fear that makes people not be able to fall asleep at night. That kind of fear is extremely horrible, and rather instead cause them to actually lose hope rather than gain the kind of stress that helps them to succeed. What's a POI?
Sure. So in the past decade, governments, politicians, and people used encouragement to let people make a change. Was there a change? No. Please engage.
There was actually to a certain extent change. For example, look at the way that we are right now. Electric vehicles are literally dominating the streets. There's so many kinds of environmental technology that only appeared in the last decade. That's one example of the various kinds of change that have occurred, and you can't possibly say that these changes aren't actually changes just because they haven't perhaps caused that much of an impact on whatever you think is actually going on. Let's get on to our final point, which is kind of an impact of basically our contention too. This is about less resources for innovation. Government side is saying that there will be actually be more resources, as in scientists will think about more tangible problems they can actually solve. However, inside of climate change, there isn't really any tangible problem that can solve that easily. There's no such thing as a so-called better use of resources, as in things that you can actually fund, which isn't realistically that possible. In reality, however, inside their side of the world, it's more likely that scientists will actually give up on hope, or to a certain extent, there'll be less funding funding for the scientists to even allocate in the first place. Under their side of the world, they have less possibility of having change because everyone doesn't feel the need for change, they feel hopeless. On our side, we have the actual motivation towards change, and thus we can actually cause a change and make it actually tangible. Thus, vote for opening opposition. Thank you.
Take a look at what opening opposition says to our entire case. They say we have a contradiction, but they give like one-liners as to what the contradiction is, and they never explain it very clearly, right? I think all they really say is that people are going to be afraid and then encouragements don't work. However, I'm going to explain what we actually mean later on in my speech. But first, let's take a look at what opening opposition tells to us. They say that if for OG, people already have hope, right? They believe in scientists and then they think scientists are trustworthy. So optimism will motivate them to change even more. 3 points of responses to this, right? Number one, they talk about statistics. They say that scientists can bring out the statistics to people and tell them that everything is okay. However, that is literally not the case right now, right? In reality, in the status quo, the statistics and the wordings are completely contradictory. The statistics will tell you that everything is probably going to be doomed. The environment cannot be brought back to its original state, right? But then the wording of the scientists will be, guys, it's okay. The earth is not going to die, right? This is not the actuality, the genuine ideologies that happening in real life, right? What's going on actually is that the environment will never go back to its original state. It's irreversible, right? Any action to take towards making the environment better will actually do nothing, right? If the statistics already show that, I don't think people are stupid enough to believe the words based completely off the words and not the stats, right? But number two, I think they talk about encouragement, right? If there's optimism, it encourages people to change. It motivates people to change. This is completely not true in the status quo. Encouragement literally is not working, right? Take a look at the status quo. How many times have the government told you that do not litter, do not use plastic products because it's going to litter the ocean and make it polluted, right? Animals are dying. The whales are going extinct. There's so many animals going extinct. You're probably going to be extinct in a couple thousand years too, right? Is anyone actually taking enough action to solve it? No, right? I'm probably sure that in your home, you already have like plastic things, right? You probably have thrown things away unintentionally, subconsciously, or even intentionally in school, which is also plastic, which is also littering, right? If you go on the picnic, sometimes your wrapper just flies away, right? It's also littering. I don't think anyone is doing any substantive work into making this environment better, which means that encouragement isn't really working. The only way for people to be motivated to change is by feeling a threat, right? If they feel like, oh my god, I'm actually gonna die in a couple thousand years, like, not even a couple thousand years. If the scientists frame it in a way that says, oh, the environment is actually going to be so damaged, we're never going to go back to the original state, and therefore a lot of people are going to die in the status quo, I think people are going to be more likely to think, oh no, like my life is going to be ruined, my kids' lives are going to be ruined, like what about my entire family, right? They're more likely to think, okay, I need to take changes now, otherwise I'm going to die, I don't want to die, right? But number three, it's only with the ideas of doomerism can governments actually take action, right? Currently, the governments are not focusing on environmental change as much. There are so many innovations in technology. There's so many innovations in like tech and open AI and stuff like that, right? But nobody's actually talking about the environment, right? When you look at the news, it's often something like, these cars are doing well, right? Computers are doing well, right? The stock market is benefiting and everything. Nobody's actually taking a look at the environment and telling us that global warming is actually a very big problem, right? It is only when you cause fear that the government will think, oh no, like my citizens are actually panicking. That's a bad thing, right? But now that's the opposition is gonna probably come back at that point by saying, that means they're gonna have fear. That's a bad thing. People are gonna go panic, and then they're gonna do really like posh actions or very extreme actions. 3 points of responses. Number one, fear will actually motivate these people more instead of making them try to have like suicidal thoughts or like mass panic in squares. I think it's absolutely not true. But two, if we just take a look at the statistics right now, even opposition themselves says that the society right now is 50-50, right? We have half people who half of the entire world that thinks that the environment is pretty much doomed, and another that thinks it's optimistic, right? So I'm not sure if opposition can come up to me and say that if fear is likely to happen, they're gonna take severe actions, because the 50% of people who think that the environment is doomed right now isn't really killing themselves out there, right? And number three, I think the government will have an even more incentive if the people have slight fear and they're telling on social media like, oh my god, what happens if I die in a couple years if the environment is actually like doomed, right? Also, moving on. So opposition, they also talk about something that's kind of absurd, right? They say that we're going to trust the government. Trust the scientists. However, on our side, we think that only with this trust comes with trust. You have to be reliable in order to be trusted. If you say something that completely contradicts the status quo, completely contradicts what's going on actually in the society right now, your trust level goes down, right? So if I don't think people are stupid in the society. If they go out and they see plastic hanging over like tree branches or something, and then the government say, the environment is okay, we're gonna bring it all back to the original state without plastic hanging on trees, right? I think this is already very stupid, right? People are not gonna be stupid enough to say that the scientists are probably like, they're always correct and everything, but I still see the pollution happening in my real life, right? They're more likely to believe what they see instead of what they hear, right? They see the plastic in real life, and then the scientists go tell them, there's probably not enough plastic to ruin the society anyways. I don't think people are actually going to trust that really much. And if that actually happens, I think there's going to be more mass panic on their side of the house, because whatever the scientists say afterwards to actually try to do anything will actually make the people panic even more, right? Now, two questions I need to answer that I think answers the entire opposition's concern on our stance, right? They tell us, they ask us, right, what resources are the scientists actually allocating to, or what field are the scientists actually allocating it to? I think it looks like things like more reliable like environmental changes, such as like better shampoo or like better products, but it could also be about space exploration, about rocks, about life on other planets, about how we can transport a lot of our stocks, a lot of our products currently to other places where we can extend the human life, right? I think it's more likely that if the scientists go tell them that the environment right now is already doomed, that's why we're focusing on the resources on something else, something that can actually benefit you as a society, right? I think it's more likely that the people are going to trust the scientists if the scientists go tell them we're allocating the resources effectively in these areas because the status quo is already that the environment is failing. But number two, we need to tell the public the truth, right? I don't think a society, a scientific community should be relied on completely on lies, right? On opposition, all everybody is hearing is lies, right? If your teacher tells you that you're super good at studying, but then you know that you get B's every time you take a math test, I don't think you're actually gonna trust your teacher after like 3 times of them telling you that your grades are actually really good, like you're gonna get into a good college later on. I don't think you're actually going to trust them later, right? This is exactly what's going on in the status quo. And we say it's very, very important that we allocate the resources correctly, but also number two, that we make the trust and reliability happen in the scientific community throughout your entire lifespan. So yeah, please, government.
A few couple of things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to do some rebuttal against the entire OG, and then some rebuildings and extension of our cases and weighing to prove why we are winning this debate. Firstly, some rebuttals, right? What had PM told you? PM first told you that climate change is irreversible and it is widely known. Firstly, this is basically not true, right? Because we tell you that now the world is 50-50 divided, and that there are still a lot of people who think that climate change is reversible. But secondly, even if you don't buy this, I think that their side of the house is still just much more worse, right? Because by saying climate change irreversible, of course, climate change is irreversible, but the status, it is irreversible. But the status quo is we have lots of people focusing on this issue, right? That is exactly why there are so many national leaders gathering every year to have meetings about climate change. This is exactly why we can see electric cars almost everywhere in cities like Shanghai, right? This is why those kind of new electric resources are growing so fast, because even though maybe some people think it is irreversible, we're trying to seek a solvency. Even if it doesn't have a really big impact, it is still sort of providing the face to humanity, because humanity is the one which is living on Earth, right? We're the living things on the Earth, and it is not only about ourselves, it is also about having the obligation to all the other living things like animals and stuff on this world, right? Because climate change is directly caused by us. That is why we have to try our every best to solve this problem, because it is exactly created by us. Even if we can't solve it very efficiently at the end of the day, at least we don't feel regretted. At least we think that we've tried our best, and that is the best reward to humanity. And finally, some kind of rebuttals against their arguments, right? Onto their first argument about setups. they try to claim that they're going to have fast allocation of limited resources, and scientists on our side of the house is just going to dump so many time, which is useless. I think first of all, this is basically not true, right? Those scientists, while they're like kind of like actually doing researches on these kind of climate changes, they also find new fields of studies and have new innovations, right? Like electric cars and stuff like that. It is not only trying to solve this climate change, but through the process of trying to solve it, we have so many innovations popping up, right? So that, like, through the processes, there are just so many things that's popping up that is really valuable to humanity. That is why we always want to progress, because humanity wants to achieve a higher level and want to be better. But second of all, about encouragement and fear, I think that this is basically going to be worse on their side of the house. Why? Because on their side of the house, they make people disappointed massively. Because I think like their DPM tries to argue something about accountability, but I think it is exactly on their side of the house that people feel less accountability, right? Because like the government just simply told you, you're gonna be doomed. We're not gonna solve this problem anyways. Like we don't care about you anymore. Like I think in their kind of world, people really feel betrayed and abandoned by their government, right? Because their government doesn't really tell them anything to do to improve their lives, because they also live on Earth, right? I think that this is simply gonna be worse on their side of the house, because people feel the lack of accountability from the government. They feel like the government doesn't want to care about their national issues or their lives anymore. This means that it is simply much more worse on their side of the house. But secondly, why is this kind of encouragement really important? Because I think that this kind of phase is the route for people to have more progresses, is the route for those scientists to actually have so many researches and stuff like that, away from reputation and having high respect of the society. I think that they also want to do something for humanity, right? Because they're living on this world as well. And that is why this kind of phase is really important, because it is the support and the route for them to have more scientific progresses. Even if you don't buy it, I think that it's still going to be worse on their side of the house, because their side of the house is just going to have significantly less innovation, right? Because since the government puts less resources on these kind of issues, they're going to receive less funding and less attention from the public. Then those industries are going to like pretty much die out, right? And those scientists are no longer have the incentive to actually create new things, because they feel like, oh, I'm paid so bad, I don't actually have any incentive to do this, right? Government don't respect me anymore, why should I still do this for them, right? I think that in comparison, on their side of house, it's just gonna have much more less innovation. Even if you don't buy our point about climate change reversible, I think that we still can do the transition, because during the transition of optimism to doomerism, you're going to cause a massive like hit on the economy, right? As my Ella has already told you, those kind of like environment like industries, they're going to go bankrupt, right? People are going to get unemployment on their side of the house. Like it is already so much a big industry, like new resources and stuff like that. It's already so a big an industry in the state as cool. If they want to do the transition on their side of the house, it is going to cause massive harms. Even if they want to say it is short-term harm, I think that it is still very catastrophic, because the short-term transition can already cause a lot of people go unemployment, can already cause a lot of economic deflation and stuff like that. And that is why we simply win on this point. But finally, about like not important on people what people think, and fear is the last result. I think I don't see the necessity of oppressing people. Because I've already told you, on their side of the house, people will just gonna feel betrayed and abandoned. Because all of the signals the government is sending on their side of the house is to tell you that there is no way to solve this. You're doomed. You're gonna die because of climate change, and all of us do, right? This is a very sign and action of irresponsible to their own citizens. I don't know why they're going to build more accountability on their side of the house, because they're exactly the side who is disappointing people. We tell you that even if you don't buy this, we think that in the long term it's still gonna be bad, right? Because if in the long term people find climate change getting worse and worse because of not giving actions on their side of the house, people are going to feel more regretted, right? People are going to feel regretted. Why don't I took any actions before, and now climate change is so bad, it is so deadly right now, right? You're just making traumatized responses to those people. I think that this kind of trauma completely outweighs the fear that they provided on their side of the house, which is just merely oppressions. But finally, some weighings and also some extensions, right? I think that on our side of the house, it's because we outweigh because our impacts is just much more realistic. We tell you that even if you don't buy these things like emotional things or stuff like that, the practical harms are still gonna happen no matter what on their side of the house, right? Because on their side of the house, it is not only losing face, but it is also a big industry declining. Lots of people getting unemployment and lots of people getting so traumatized by this kind of exploitations. Nobody ever feels like living happily on their side anymore, right? Because of all those fears created by the government. So I think in comparison, it is only on our side of the house can we give more solvencies. And even if we don't solve climate change at the end of the day, it's still gonna be better because we're going to support them. And for all these reasons, proud to stand on OO.
So, Judge, I think we need to know one thing, right? So everyone wants to survive. That is, in the face of a disaster, humans have the urge to survive and overcome it. They are willing to change for a living in the future. And this is exactly what government team is doing. What opposition is just letting people go happy and just let them die suddenly. CG will prove to you how even in the worst case and in the best case scenario, we all benefit the environment, the people, and society as a whole. We can comparatively make a bigger change and create fewer backlash. So I feel like the main point here is the main point we're trying to prove here is why climate doomerism is more able to solve climate change compared to climate optimism. But OG takes a stance that climate change is doomed either way. So just give up. I think this is a really soft stance. So we actually already are OG because we prevent the worst case scenario, telling you that given society right now is willing to do anything for change when they notice of terrible problems in this world right now. So this is the why that we're able to solve. So even in our best case scenario, we're able to tackle climate change, and even without the best case scenario, in a worst case scenario, we're still benefiting the world. So our first extended here on how it's solving the worst case is on preventing catastrophic outcomes. So even if climate change cannot be entirely stopped, doomerism emphasizes the importance of preventing the most catastrophic outcomes by focusing on by focusing in real life worst case scenarios. Doomerism drives efforts to avoid the tipping points, such as the collapse of ecosystems or the irreversible melting of ice sheets. That could lead to unmanageable consequences. These efforts might not solve climate change, but they can indeed prevent it from becoming even more disastrous. So although we're not going back 2,000 years ago, but at least we're going to make sure that it's not going to get worse, and we can at least ensure a basic human survival. And second is on prioritizing the vulnerable populations. So doomerism often highlights the poor people and people that are most vulnerable of climate change, including the poor indigenous people and those in climate-sensitive regions. This emphasis can lead to targeted efforts to protect these groups, ensuring that resources are directed towards those people. Because only when we realize the severity can the people actually focus and can we allocate more resources that can go to prioritize these poor people and to protect them in the cases of changes or more catastrophic outcomes. So we're actually winning here on vulnerability. So with our upper houses. Third extension here is on catalyzing immediate action, which is by encouraging incremental progress. So we admit the fact that solving climate change entirely seems impossible, but however, the incremental progress that we can make can still make a very big difference. Doomerism in our side can help to frame a very small step, like one step at a time, such as crucial in delaying or minimizing harmful outcomes. So for example, we can be reduce emissions, conserving ecosystems, or adopting a small practices like not using plastic bags. All of these small actions that can only be brought by pressure, not encouragement, which I'll explain later, is a crucial part for us to contribute a step at a time to catalyze action that can solve that can help to alleviate the impact of climate change. So why exactly is pressure so important on our team? Because we believe that encouraging system is overhaul. So doomerism narrative emphasizes that small individual actions are not enough, are important, but yet not enough to combat climate change. Systematic overhaul is necessary, and this can shift the focus towards advocating for large-scale changes in how societies operate, from rethinking economic models to overhauling infrastructures. The narrative that we are running out of time, the narrative that we need to stop these issues, can encourage the system to push for systematic and policy change that can create long-term impact to benefit the environment, or at least try to alleviate the impacts of climate change. So thus, even as the worst case scenario, which is that we're not going to solve climate change, we are still able to create positive impacts. And also, this is on a practical level. Now, moving on to why we are better on a principle level, which is how we're able to promote ethical and moral responsibility. So doomerism emphasizes that the moral and ethical responsibility to act on climate change, even if the problem cannot be fully solved. So this narrative reinforces the idea that it is our duty to minimize harm and protect future generations from the worst impacts of climate change. It encourages individuals, businesses, and governments to adopt more sustainable practices, not for immediate benefits, but also as a matter of principle, the principle and the justice. And second is highlighting the intergenerational equity. So the doomerist perspective underscores the importance of considering the long-term consequences of today's actions on future generations. Even if we cannot completely solve the issues, we can still take steps to reduce the burden on those who come after us. This focuses on integration activity, equity, can inspire policies and actions that prioritize the well-being of our future generations. And thus, on a principle level, we are also there. So basically, to sum up, we are actually mitigating our worst-case scenarios, and we're actually benefiting people. Now, is there a POI? 3, human. Okay, so lack of engagement. And this is our first case about how why on the worst case we're still able to minimize climate change. And second is how why we're able to decrease backlashes. So we believe that like on our opponents team, they're just basically giving people literally like a false hope. So like people have a false confidence in future solutions. Climate optimism also revolves around the idea that in the future we're going to solve the issues. But people like they just believe that, oh, I'm fine with it. People don't have the urgency. People they're not aware of the issues, and they basically become too overconfident, and they're just too optimistic of the issues. And this can also lead to an issue which is that they can actually so like optimism is actually encouraging greenwashing. So because optimism can sometimes like lend itself into corporate greenwashing, where companies present themselves as being environmentally friendly without taking substantial changes to their practices. Corporations that they may use optimistic climate messaging to promote minor symbolic environmental efforts while continuing environmentally harmful activities behind the scenes. And this leads to severe public backlashes when these companies are exposed for misleading the claims or failing to make reactions. And this is because that the scientific community opinions can influence really on the systems and on the society, which thus if you convey a false message, a false hope, it's going to encourage greenwashing. And also in terms of scientists, this can also actually lead towards a severe backlash for scientists, because people believe that scientists they have been like tricking them, that the issue is much more severe, that they're not ready for it. And this can also even cause some backlashes towards the scientists, which is directly going against towards our opponent's case. So CG here is crucial because except for our upper house trying to prove to you about how climate is going to be solved, we provide to you how even in the worst case scenario that our team still always do their best. But in the worst case, we're still ready. So like we're psychologically ready. We are ready with the techniques. We're ready with the coefficient. We're ready when we have the people protected. Or this is even in our worst case scenario, people we're not saying climate change. But however, judge under the best scenario, so under the opposite best scenario, people are just going to end up dying and greenwashing or creating no positive impacts towards the environment. And so because there's still a possibility of reducing very positive or even to reverse environmental change by under our world, because people are at least making action, they're at least making a stance forward, they're at least doing something, even if the smallest change can make the biggest contributions. Thus, never so proud to urge a ballot for closing government. Thank you.
The entire opening half we beat because they do not give any solid, tangible impacts that will actually help the scientific community and help climate change. They've only asserted that climate change cannot be helped, but we provide actual impacts that are tangible and can actually help solve climate change. Okay, a piece of setup that I think has not been discussed enough. How does the scientific community actually get, how are they actually capable to do research and to make change? 3 ways. First of all, public donations. Second of all, government funding, which comes from taxpayers, which is basically like the general public, and third of all, public support, because they're going to be the ones pushing for this change that the government will be implementing. They're going to be the ones that are like, we want this. Okay, what do we get from this setup is that the stakeholder that we should be caring about the most is what does the general public think, because they're ultimately going to be the ones deciding the outcomes of this debate. Okay, now it's important to note that we outweigh our opening because they do not give any solid, tangible impacts, and they frankly have not weighed this pretty well. So I'm going to be doing that for them. For substantives, first of all, you get less trust in long-term solutions and big long-term solutions. A couple of mechanisms under this. First of all, the general public stops believing in long-term solutions because they believe that nothing can actually be done. So they won't be believing in any sort of solution at all. So that means there's going to be less public donations, and also there's going to be less government funding for because the public isn't pushing for this anymore. I think it's important to know about this public pushing of solutions. The government isn't going to implement these anyways because it's not their main incentive. I think their main incentive is just to give the public what they want. And if they're not pushing for environmental change, they're not going to be getting it. Yeah, I'll take the POI.
Sure. Governments are afraid of their citizens dying and they don't have a degree in science. If scientific community can tell the government that people are probably going to die, aren't governments going to actually put more money, put more resources into the scientific community to solve what you're trying to say?
I don't think so. I think without this like active pushing from the public to give them what they want, they're not going to do it. Because think about it, scientific community doesn't take up the whole population. What the government wants is to stay in power, and the only way they can do that is by giving the public what they want. So I think that's like a way bigger incentive they have. Okay, another mechanism on my substantive is because it's a very long-term solution, people will give up eventually because it's not giving like a fast enough like impact. Even though the impact can be super good and super beneficial, they're going to give up before it actually like does like the huge benefit that it could have. So impacts under this, three impacts. First of all, you never get enough funding for these scientific research, and you need funding because you get more resources, you get better resources, you probably get more opportunity for innovation, you probably get more space to make mistakes and like learn from those mistakes. Second thing is that people just have a really terrible view of the scientific community, which I'm probably going to go on in my second substantive. And the third one is that solutions are never actually implemented to actually help climate change like be solved. Why you ought care about this is because you don't get any solution, you don't get any benefit to the actual environment, and I think we can all agree that we need a way. We need something to be done about climate change because everyone suffers. The whole environment suffers. I think that's something we all agree on. I think this makes the doomerism like ideology become real as the opening government has like been repeating so much. And also, I think government funding is like a type of funding they need because they can provide the most amount of funding. Public donations isn't going to sure it is like significant, but it's not as much as the help that the government can give. And how we are different to our opening is that we look specifically at what type of solutions are going to be effective. We look at long-term solutions. We look at actually a tangible benefit to the environment. Okay, second substantive, the perception of the scientific community becomes really poo. A couple of mechanisms under this. First of all, people hate the scientific community because they're going to blame them for the terrible environment. If not enough is done to help climate change, people are going to point at the scientists and be like, hey, this to us, you need to solve it. Also, it looks like they're not trying because the scientific community under this is going to be actively dismissing solutions that they're going to be actively getting rid of solutions that don't give like that are like not possible because they're going to be like, oh, there's no way you can help climate change anyway. What's the point of even doing it? And also, people are going to think that they're doing nothing because no actual like big change is going to be made for the climate change. They're going to be like, hey, why are we funding them? They're not actually doing anything for us. Impacts of this, the scientific community is unable to make any change whatsoever because they have no support from the public and they have less funding overall. Why you should care about this is because it is such a long-term issue that affects such a large amount of people. You just never get any change with doomerism. Okay, next substantive is on why the government is less likely to make any big changes. Couple mechanisms under this. First of all, the public is not going to be actively pushing for change anymore. As I've already said, it's an incentive of the government to give the public what they want because that's how they stay in power. So if the public isn't actively pushing for like change in the government, which I think is like the most impactful and the biggest change you can possibly get, you're not going to get any change from the government. Another reason why the government probably wouldn't make these changes without public support is because it's probably expensive and not their main priority. I think they have no incentive to do this without the support of the public. Impacts of this, the government doesn't fund scientific solutions, and funding is good, as I said, because you get better resources, you get more resources, and you get more room for innovation, and they just like don't implement any policies that are actually like told by the scientific community, hey, this is going to be really good and really impactful in the long term. Okay, why should all care about this? It's because the government can make the biggest changes in society. They make the biggest impact. We claim the biggest impact in this debate, so that's why you all put us at the top. We claim because the government can make decisions for the whole country. I think that's like the biggest impact you could possibly have. And also, big solutions are never going to actually get made. I think doomerism is centered around the idea that we need, in order to actually like improve the state of our environment, we need like an immediate huge change. And first of all, that's just not going to be possible with or without this like model. So no, I don't think this is going to be possible without this model. I think long-term solutions that will be extremely beneficial to the environment are just never going to be made anyways. How we different is we introduced the new group of the government, and we're specific about the biggest, the most powerful stakeholder in this debate about the government. Okay, final substantive is how we get more scientists in a bigger scientific community. So it's, a couple of mechanisms under this. First of all, young inspired scientists are going to go look at the scientific community. If they're actively pushing, hey, look, we're doing stuff to actually make the environment better, they're going to be like, hey, maybe I can get involved and actually make the environment better. Whereas with doomerism, you have none of that. Nobody's going to look at the scientific community and like feel inspired by them because they're not actually doing anything they're pushing that they can't do anything better for the environment. They're like at a standstill, and all we're trying to do is like get us out of this hole that like we've dug ourselves into. So instead of feeling like useless little bums, they're going to actually get off their bums and do something. Impacts of this: you get more scientists, you get more innovation from these scientists, you get better solutions because you have more scientists, and you get more demand. You get more demand for actually like scientific beneficial impacts. Why you all care about this is because it makes it more likely to have like a huge impact and a huge change and a huge benefit to climate change. How we differ is our effect on the science. Like we actually look at the effects on the scientific community as a separate stakeholder. So overall, we win because we are able to claim the biggest impact, and we introduce new stakeholders that I think we ought care about and have not been clearly discussed in this debate.
I feel like the opening house is in the deadlock of whether we should give up on climate change or not. That should not be what the debate is about. This debate should be about whether more change will be able to be made from climate optimism or doomerism, and if we can't solve climate change, which side can minimize the backlashes, and if we are able to solve climate change, which side will give more benefits. I'll prove all 3 points to why CG wins this debate, right? But first of all, let me say why we wait over OG. OG gives us 2 points, because funding climate change will be a waste of time, of money, and climate change is irreversible, and 2, they have a better allocation of resources. We agree that it is realistic for scientists to focus on smarter resource allocation, but we'll take the harder stance and prove why even when scientists are incentivized to change, because it's human nature to try and survive the worst outcomes, we tell you that even if they do have to spread the limited resources on climate change, climate doomerism is still more important than climate optimism. I think the main point we are trying to prove here is why climate doomerism is more able to solve climate change compared to climate optimism, right? This looks like, but OG takes a stance that climate change is like doomed either way, so we should just give up. I think this is a really soft stance. So we already way over OG because we prevent the worst case scenario, telling you that if given the society right now is willing to do anything for change when they notice of the terrible problems this world is in right now, because they have the incentive, the human nature to fight, to be desperate for survival, they are more incentivized to at least minimize the pain of the environment if we are actually doomed, right? So why we're over them? Because 1, we are able to benefit more the more important stakeholders with our argument, which is that which are the scientists and the community, right? There are 2 worst cases likely to happen, which is the scientists feed you with lies until you get brainwashed in climate optimism, and the community being unable to solve climate change and feel useless and helpless in the end, in the long term. We win in both the worst cases. This is because when the scientist does feed you with lies and they are unable to solve climate change, because that's like incredibly unlikely, it is when optimistic promises fail to like materialize, right? And that can lead to like public illusionment and like disengagement. If the scientists like overly optimistic on the situation worsens, people may lose trust in science and feel betrayed, which is what CO said that is somehow a problem on our side, to which I'll prove why it's not later. And doomerism, while it's hard to understand, sets realistic expectations, right? And reduces the risk of future disillusionment when these challenges arise again, right? So secondly, then I'll be charitable and say that the scientists will also get attacked on like our side, but we still get another form of benefit, which is that because we are holding these people responsible for making this crisis accountable remains critical, right? So for example, like the governments, the corporations, the individuals, then doomerism keeps a spotlight on them. So we continue to contribute to these people that continue to contribute to these problems. And this ensures that there's a continued pressure for transparency, responsibility, and for the most vulnerable communities as a whole, right? And we win on that because we protect the scientists, make another form of change, even if we can't solve climate change, and we're willing to take the backlash of people living under some suppression if we're able to let them have less problems in the long run. We way over OG. Now move on to because I feel the cases are really messy. They give us idea that how they can have an increase a motivation towards change. This is 100% not going to happen because climate optimism creates a sense of overconfidence that the situation is under control and like emerging technology and policy changes will be sufficient enough to solve the crisis. This leads to complacency where individuals and companies and like governments feel less pressure to take urgent and radical actions. When people believe that government is manageable or that solutions are already on the way, they are less likely to push for deep systematic changes that are actually needed, right? This is really realistic because it's human nature to feel reassured when people tell you that they're already doing good enough and to slowly edge you on, right? But while alongside government, even when the outcome is uncertain or imperfect, it encourages individuals, communities, and nations to take whatever steps they can do to reduce that harm, supporting the vulnerable, and preserve as much as the natural world as possible, right? This
this focus on actions, despite like the risks and odds, reinforces the idea that every single effort counts and they are desperate to fight for survival, and giving up is not an option. Secondly, then they talk about how like everyone feels hopeless. I feel like, yes, we can see everyone feel hope if we feel hopeless in the short term, right? I can see that some people might feel hopeless in the short term, but even if we feel hopeless in the short term, it's much more better than if we feel drastic change in the long term, right? This looks at the hopelessness in doomerism, eliminating like the false sense of like security that climate optimism can create, right? By acknowledging that the situation is dire and potentially like unsolvable, doomerism avoids the people into a complacency that might come from believing that the crisis is under control or that solutions are like just around the corner because of climate optimism. Then they say something really contradictory by saying that if we can't solve climate change, they will feel resentment and sad that they haven't done anything. This is what's happening in the world right now, right? Because of climate optimism. The idea that climate optimism makes people feel happy and lazy because they think that the world isn't that like doomed right now is what makes them feel worse in the long term. And yes, while it's completely reverse of climate change is like might be impossible, doomerism emphasizes the need to budgetate its most catastrophic effects, right? This looks like by acknowledging like that the damage is inevitable. Doomerism encourages actions that can prevent the worst outcomes, such as like extreme sea level rise, uninhabitable regions, and like this focus on damage control is crucial for minimizing harm to human populations and ecosystems, right? So this cannot be achieved on opposite debate. Now CO, right? I feel like CO entered this debate very randomly by talking about how like people would not have the money and the science company is bad. That's really not the point of the debate here. I feel we can all agree that the premise of this debate is not on economics, but rather on whether you can make more change, right? This is why OG is also a bit less strong than us, but they also provide arguments, but CO also comes up and provides arguments about how the scientific community cannot make change because of less support and they should all just offer solutions. I think really unrealistic utopia, because where are you going to get these solutions, right? The CO do not say anything about that, so the entire case falls, right? I think it's understandable that like they basically built a premise on how the government is able to do anything, and just for that, they're out of the debate because it's completely unrealistic. So why do we win, right? We win because we reach all the benefits that we can implement, which is whether more change will be made, and somehow if we can't make or we can solve climate change, we'll still get more benefits. From our arguments, we prove that when people are optimistic about the future, there's a tendency to believe that there is more time to act, leading to delays in implementing these necessary changes. This lack of urgency can be particularly dangerous in the context of climate change, right? Where the window for effective action is closing really fast, right? Every year, the delay like increases the difficulty of managing like climate impacts, and optimism just makes the decision makers go slower into thinking that immediate aggressive action is not needed. We need immediate aggressive action. Vote for OG because I've proven that vote for CG because I've proven that even when climate change cannot be solved, doomerism does not eliminate hope, it reframes it. For all reasons above, so proud. Thank you.
Okay, so the rest of the debate kind of concedes that climate change is unpreventable, and then instead of focusing on the real impacts we can get towards fixing climate change, they focus on how the public feels and how that creates like fear or like happiness in the individual. We will not agree with the characterization that climate change is unpreventable. We believe that the actions towards climate change, which we are proving, are actually going to create real impacts. We win this debate because we actually prove impact, rather than saying, oh, well, we aren't able to get a complete prevention, therefore we won't be able to get any prevention. We are coming in and giving you two main extensions. Firstly, that we get less trust in the scientific community. We heard from OO that why we trust scientists inherently. We're on CO, we're different because we prove why we completely lose this. Okay, 3 reasons. Firstly, if climate doomerism exists, people believe that nothing can happen towards fixing climate change, and therefore people are suspicious of what scientists are doing when they don't see huge impacts, huge changes happening, even though a lot of that stuff is really important. For example, doing research into long-term projects, which I'll talk about in a second. I'll take you soon. Secondly, people are less faithful in the scientific community. They believe less that science can prevent climate change, and therefore they are less likely to trust in the technology advancements that we are able to receive when we have more funding and everything, and when we just get technology inherently. We prove firstly why people are less likely, why we're going to get less technology, and secondly, why the technology that's created is going to be less used. So why is the technology less trusted? People
when people believe that their actions are less impactful towards solving climate change, they don't believe that their individual efforts are worthy. This means that we're going to have less collective action. This means we're going to have less people investing into green energy, investing into making their household a cleaner, more green, sustainable space. This means they're less likely to do things like install solar panels, less likely to do things like drive an electric car, because they firstly don't believe in the scientific community, and secondly don't believe that their actions can actually have impacts. This is why we are actually able to prove that that the impacts of the scientific advancements actually are just worse when there is climate doomerism, which is why, and since the scientific community is trying to solve climate change, we think that they would like completely object to anything that would prevent this. Thirdly, just the fact that they will have like less funding. The reason why they will have less funding is because that there is less trust in the community. When people don't believe that science can actually solve climate change because the scientific community itself is telling you, I don't feel optimistic about this, I think that everything's going to hell and I don't think we're going to be able to succeed in fighting this. When the scientific community themselves is telling you this, you just get people less willing to like invest their money into that because they don't believe that their money, investing money into scientific advancements is actually helpful. How does this look? This looks like people donating to universities in like areas that are like researching for climate change. People are less likely to do this in this world. Our second extension is about how we get less long-term impacts. Two things under this. Firstly, that people have less faith in long-term projects. For example, when scientists do research, general research that will help get advances in the future, they'll be less supportive of that because they don't see real impact. Secondly, things like investing research into green energy, something will inherently take a long time. People are less patient and therefore less willing. Secondly, why we don't get good government policies. Doomerism doesn't believe in small steps. They believe that the only way we can solve it is by huge impacts. And this means that trying to get change from the government is just going to be worse. They're going to be looking for really big changes like banning types of energy, like banning coal. The government has an inherent disincentive to do things like that because of money, because it's expensive, and secondly, because they get a lot of funding from areas that just support those things. However, we are able to take small steps and able to like actually implement small policies like cleaner energy and like I guess government areas. Now I'm going to go into rebuttal. Firstly, from OO, what did I hear? From OO, I kind of like understood that from OG, I kind of understood that climate change is irreversible, something that we can test. Secondly, we heard that climate change, we heard that fear is going to instill more people to act. Firstly, I just want to point out these two things are completely contradictory. If you think that climate change can't be reversed, then how do you believe that fear is actually going to have any impact? They talk a lot about they did some rebuttal to they said that we will trust less in scientists because they're not using doomerism. We just respond to this and say that transparency and optimism are not like mutually exclusive. We can have both honesty and optimism in making people care about it more. Okay, now on to OO. From OO, I kind of like hear a lot of things about how people are more likely to sure.
It's on the info slide. It says that people will do extreme actions to protect themselves with climate doomerism, and how is this probable on your side of the house if people are already making bigger and more extreme impacts to actually try to solve climate change on our side?
I think that it's not true that our case is kind of just saying that it's not true that we are able to like get those big impacts. We are going to be able to like get the government to do things that will completely eradicate climate change, and therefore like actions towards that are just like bad. Trying to get small changes is just something that will like leak upwards from that point. Getting small changes in like local communities, getting small changes in the government itself, those policies will like create a like public change and be able to leak up. I think that responds. Also said that they just made that main case about how we get better like support for like climate change. They proved that the general public is probably more optimistic about climate change. They really just don't do anything. They just don't really have many mechanisms about how this actually gets changed. We proved that you get more faith in the scientific community under our side, and therefore you're more likely to like fund it. You're more likely to contribute yourself by using technology, and we prove that this actually gets more change, more innovations, and more trust in those innovations. They told us that people feel hopeful. This is vague. We had no like real impacts, real examples. We don't really like hear anything about like where this actually goes. And on CO, we are actually able to provide this. On CG, I really don't believe that much. I believe that climate change is mitigatable, but I don't believe how they're going to actually be able to achieve this. We hear a lot of the same mechanisms that we heard on OG about how people are like fearful and therefore going to act more, but we really don't hear what that kind of action looks like. And that's why our case just kind of is better than everyone else's, because we actually do prove how this actually translates into real impacts, how this actually translates into real change, and how we are able to actually just get a better advancements in the scientific community, more people participating, meaning more actual direct change. We do not accept that action against climate change is impossible. We believe that it can be prevented, it can be slowed down, and this is winning material. Out of CO.